Hey everybody, let's go back to Star Wars. We've covered a lot of things about the new Star Wars trilogy, for better or for worse, and today I'd like to look at the merchandising side. Because Star Wars toys, if you might notice, haven't been selling like they used to. I haven't spent a lot of time studying toys, but I do know enough about how they relate to movies to say some things here, which may also shed some light on some of the problems with the creative aspects of the movies themselves. One of the major functions of toys seems to be that they let us practice at adulthood. In the case of kids, like we covered in the Barbie video, this can mean practicing at using their role model's tools, or doing what their role model does, or practicing being in adult situations. This means that a good toy has to have certain traits. A role model who kids find appropriate, very capable, with powerful or interesting tools, or things that they want to use themselves, or a world where powerful or interesting things happen that they want to practice or imagine themselves in. Now, what's interesting about this, I think, is that it relates directly to fantasy movies, and this is where we can start to show where the new Star Wars movies have had problems. Like we've talked about, the basic formula for fantasy or action movies is very simple. Either a fancy person comes to a plain world, or a plain person goes to a fancy world. If you study pretty much every successful movie in that genre, and actually other genres, you'll see that that's the underlying idea. We've covered why it works, but when it comes to selling toys based on those stories, the key to it is that you sell the fancy part. The toy sales on Batman movies, for example, are focused on Batman, his outfit, his base, his gadgets, and so on. Since Batman is that fancy, ideal person who changes the normal world in the story, children, or our inner children, want to practice at being Batman, dressing like him, using his things, and understanding what makes him so great. Now, of course, Batman isn't real, but our instincts don't know that. And this is true for pretty much any superhero. Although a hero who has fewer outfits and unique things, like Superman, won't sell nearly as much. On the other side of the coin, when your story is focused on a plain person going to a fancy place, you sell the place. If you notice, people aren't that interested in buying Harry Potter toys. Now, don't get me wrong, there are toys that say Harry Potter on the package that sell really well, but it's not Harry Potter that we want. It's Hogwarts, the special place that Harry Potter goes to. We want to go there too. And that's what Harry Potter toys and merchandise are about. We don't want to be Harry Potter because essentially we already are. Plain heroes are supposed to be identifiable. They tend to be the same age as the intended audience and are humble with blank personalities, so we can put ourselves in their place. And this is a very important dynamic. If you don't do it correctly, your sales will suffer. And this is where the wild changes that were made to the Star Wars universe started to cause problems. So let's look back at what we said. First, to work best, a fantasy movie has to have either a normal person going to a special world or a special person coming to a normal world. In the initial movies, Luke Skywalker, who was a plain farm boy, went on an adventure in outer space. In the new trilogy, we have Rey, who was set up as a plain hero, but actually turns out to be smarter and better than the other characters, without even having to learn. So, besides the many storytelling problems this creates, which I'll try to resist talking about, you have a messed up setup when it comes to selling your toys. Because while the setup should be a plain, humble character going to the fancy world, you have a character who I guess we could best describe as a superhero who's better than everyone else and who actually should not be a young person because that's threatening to your audience. But again, I'm trying not to go into that, who should be the focus of your products. She should be physically impressive and should dress and look interesting with distinct colors, all so that you pay attention to her immediately and think she's a capable person who you'd want to study and be like. But instead, they put her in plain clothes like Luke Skywalker, the humble hero. On top of that, Rey should have unique and powerful tools, things she uses that we would want to try ourselves, and that we can't get elsewhere and have to buy at the toy store. But Rey doesn't have any, does she? Her superior powers are just stuff she does due to her inherent greatness, instead of things or objects that we could have ourselves. And on top of that, given the mishmashed nature of things, you have a whole other side, which is the world that Rey goes into. Star Wars was always set up to be a plain person going to a fancy world as a story. And Star Wars had all kinds of unique and different things that the character gets to see in that world as they go on their adventure, that people could buy and experience. But if you notice, in the new trilogy, that was actually cut off at the knees, because the special world that Rey goes to is the same one we've already seen. 95% of it looks just like the original trilogy. Rey flies the same ship, she meets almost all of the same characters, she joins a resistance that looks the same, who uses almost identical uniforms and technology, and fights basically the same enemies. We already bought those toys. You're not giving us anything else to try or anywhere new to want to visit. But the biggest problem of all is what happened to the lightsaber. The lightsaber is the weapon that defines the most important characters in the movie. It's what sets them apart. And its look, its mythology, and its use are all handled flawlessly in their first appearance. It's probably the greatest piece of movie merchandise ever. But in the new series, just about everything goes sideways. They'd already lost a bit of their specialness in the prequel trilogy, but here it goes even further. The sense of strength and importance, which was key to their appeal to fans, was something that George Lucas understood.
George was adamant that these things were really, really heavy, that we couldn't take a hand off, like Excalibur.
And that slowly disappeared over time. And in this series, it's almost gone completely. Weight is actually a key factor when we judge the importance of something.
Whoa, this is heavy.
Because while fast and acrobatic movement draws our attention, weight draws our attention too because it indicates power and strength, but it gives us something else as well. Danger. That instinctive sense of threat, of size and force, makes us not just pay attention, but care about it too, and it increases our adrenaline while we're watching. It also is a key factor when young people decide what they want to play with. Grown-up things are large and powerful. They're heavier. That's part of the appeal in what kids want to buy. And another major source of the appeal is what the characters themselves think of it. If your role model values something, then you as a young person will value it too. So taking something that looks valuable and important and having your most admired character throw it away is a great way to immediately ruin its appeal to your audience. I can't overemphasize how much damage that does. And like we've talked about, while it may surprise your audience, surprise is a much weaker feeling than what you get when you care about what you're seeing and it pays off your desires. Surprises that make you stop caring are not a good idea. Anyway, at the end of the series, Rey does get a new lightsaber, which is a different color and is treated as important. But by that point, the story's over. You don't get to see her use it, and the damage really has been done. And I think that brings us to the big question. How did that happen? Why was the plot tossed together at the last minute, with these random or even negative changes? Well, I think it was another example of what we talked about before. The dual realities that Disney and Star Wars fans exist in. The pleasure of the filmmakers here didn't come from making a great Star Wars movie, since they may have been bored with making big-budget movies, or didn't take pride in it since they weren't the creators. Their pleasure came from pursuing real-world political goals using the movie, and they didn't have the instinctive interest in the story that would have guided these choices and who they hired. And maybe that's a good thing to take away from this. A lot of these choices can seem difficult or complicated, but you don't actually have to know all these things if you can just follow your own feelings. To do that, though, we have to feel what our audience does, which we only can if we're making something that we ourselves care about. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.